My name is Jenna Walker. The night I screamed back at my father in our Ohio farmhouse kitchen, he told me I'd only embarrass myself if I chased my dream. He didn't know that one day, that embarrassment would become the pride of our entire town. Before we dive into the story, tell me where you're watching from. I love knowing who's out there hearing this. Drop your city or country in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about standing tall when your own family tries to cut you down. They say you shouldn't yell at your parents, that it's a sign of disrespect. But what about when they disrespect your soul? I still remember the way the old clock ticked in the corner of the kitchen like it was keeping score, like it was waiting for me to snap. I said no, my father repeated, folding his arms across his chest, his flannel shirt straining around his shoulders. You are not applying to a military school. That's no place for a girl. I stood frozen by the sink, my fingers still damp from washing dishes. Why not? I asked, already knowing the answer, already bracing for it. Because you'll embarrass yourself, and me. His eyes, the same pale green as mine, didn't flinch. That's what made it worse. He didn't say it to hurt me. He said it like it was a fact, like gravity. The plate in my hand nearly slipped. Mom sat at the table, peeling potatoes like this wasn't happening, like the rising heat in the room wasn't pressing down on us all. She didn't even look up. So that's it, I said, voice trembling, but not from fear. You'd rather I stay here and be small than go somewhere that demands strength? Rick Walker leaned back, shaking his head like I was ridiculous. This isn't about strength. It's about reality. You don't have what it takes. Those 6 words. You don't have what it takes. Something inside me splintered clean through. I dropped the plate into the sink with a clatter and turned to face him fully. My voice came out low, sharp. Then I'll embarrass you with honor. His eyebrows lifted, just a flick, but I saw it. The moment he realized I wasn't backing down, that's the thing about silence. When you break it, it echoes louder than a shout. I stormed out, the screen door banging behind me, the cold Ohio air biting at my arms as I crossed the yard barefoot. I didn't even grab a coat. My heart was burning hot enough. Out in the barn, I climbed up into the hayloft like I used to when I was a little girl, before I knew what limitation meant. Before I understood that in my father's eyes, strength only looked one way, and it didn't look like me. Up there in the dark, the tears came. I let them. Not because I was broken, but because I was done hiding the parts of me that wanted more. That dared to dream of a life beyond this town, beyond this farm, beyond being someone else's shadow. Mom never came after me. Not that night, maybe not ever, but I wasn't alone. Because sitting in that loft, knees pulled to my chest, I made a promise. Not to prove him wrong, but to prove me right. I didn't know yet what path I'd take or how long it would twist. But that night in the silence between sobs, my purpose was born. They say anger fades with time. Mine didn't. It just shifted. By the time I left for college in Cincinnati, the dream of military school was buried under piles of financial aid paperwork, scholarship essays, and late-night worries about tuition deadlines. It wasn't that I gave up, it's that I found another path to discipline, one my father wouldn't see coming. Medicine. Healing, order, grit. It had everything the military had except the uniform. My dorm room was tiny, barely wide enough for 2 twin beds and a desk that rocked when I typed too hard. But to me, it was a kingdom, my own space, my own rules, and then there was Elise. My roommate walked into my life with a braid down her back, combat boots on her feet, and a mug that said, "This is probably vodka." Spoiler, it never was. "Jenna Walker," she said, squinting at the name on the door. "You sound like a senator's daughter." "And you sound like you just escaped from an indie film," I replied, instantly regretting it. But she laughed. "Good, I like girls with teeth." That's how it started. Not with trust or stories, but with sarcasm and caffeine. We became sisters without meaning to. She could sleep through fire alarms, I couldn't sleep through my own thoughts. She made ramen in a coffee pot, I alphabetized my textbooks. But somehow it worked. One rainy October night, I was sitting cross-legged on my bed, surrounded by open anatomy books, highlighters in every color, and the kind of stress that lives in your jaw. Elise handed me a steaming mug of instant coffee, no questions asked. "You're gonna make one hell of a doctor, Jenna," she said, flopping onto her bed and throwing a stress ball in the air like it didn't matter if the world was on fire. I wanted to believe her. I needed to. But deep down, a small voice whispered, would Dad believe it? Would he even care? I never told Elise about the fight, not the real one. She knew my father and I weren't close. She could tell by the way my voice dropped every time he called, or how I never saved his voicemails. But I never gave her the details. Maybe I was still protecting him, or maybe I was still protecting me. Instead, I poured my ache into ambition. My journal became my confessional. Pages and pages of words like resilience and duty, as if writing them enough could make them stick to my bones. I'd sketched tiny fire symbols in the corners, a secret reminder of the part of me that still burned for something more. Because while medicine gave me purpose, it didn't quite fill the space that military school had carved out in my chest. That space, the one built for action, for movement, for doing something that could never be dismissed as girlish. I told myself becoming a doctor would be enough, that it would be noble enough, hard enough, respected enough. But when I called home after acing my physiology midterm and Dad said, "Well, you always were a bookworm," I felt that same old crack in my chest. Still not enough. Still not him saying he was proud. I pressed the phone to my ear, listening to his silence after I told him about the internship I'd landed at the hospital. Mom muttered something about how that would keep me busy, and Dad said he had to get back to fixing the shed. I hung up before the tears came. Elise didn't ask what was wrong. She just tossed me a chocolate bar from her secret stash and said, "People who belittle you are just scared of what they can't control." I nodded, even though I wasn't sure if that made it better or worse. I just knew I was tired of shrinking to make other people comfortable, so I studied harder, woke up earlier, ran laps on the campus track until my legs felt like jelly and my chest felt hollowed out. And when I was done, I wrote about it. In my journal, in my class essays, in anonymous posts on forums for women in male-dominated spaces. I didn't sign them Jenna Walker. I signed them J. I liked the way it sounded. Neutral, unapologetic, like someone who didn't care if her dreams made other people squirm. But even as my world expanded, new friends, new classes, new chances, I couldn't outrun the voice in my head. His voice. That Ohio drawl telling me you don't have what it takes, so I kept pushing. I couldn't afford to break. Not yet. Not when I was so close to becoming someone he would have to respect, even if he never said it out loud. And maybe, just maybe, I didn't need his approval anymore. But I wasn't ready to test that theory. Not yet, so I kept quiet. I kept building. I kept going. Because that's what you do when you're chasing something bigger than bitterness. Graduating should have felt like something. For years, summa cum laude, honors in biomedical science. A resume that could knock down doors if only someone would open one. But instead of job offers, I collected rejections. A quiet, polite avalanche of we've chosen to move forward with other candidates that somehow still buried me. The day I packed up my tiny dorm room and slid my diploma into a cardboard box marked miscellaneous, I didn't feel accomplished. I felt exhausted, numb, and embarrassed to be going back. I hadn't meant to return home, not even for a visit. But the city was expensive, and my part-time job at the hospital had ended with graduation. My lease was up. I needed a place to breathe just for a few weeks, so I went back to the farmhouse, back to the chipped white siding and sagging porch swing, back to the kitchen with the ticking clock and the smell of black coffee that somehow still made my stomach twist. Mom met me at the door. She gave me a one-armed hug and said, "Your room's just like you left it." That's how I knew she hadn't looked inside, because I wasn't the same person who'd left it. Dad was in the garage when I arrived, elbows deep in the guts of an old riding mower. He glanced up, wiped his hands on a rag, and said, "Didn't expect you so soon. Not congratulations, not we're proud of you, just didn't expect you." "I couldn't find work yet," I admitted, trying to keep it casual. "Just here for a little bit while I apply around." He snorted. "Guess all those books didn't teach you how to get hired, huh?" I froze for half a second, then forced a smile. Guess not. But inside, my chest curled in on itself. Dinner that night was quiet. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, the usual. I kept my elbows off the table, tried to ask Mom about the garden, tried not to care that Dad was watching the evening news instead of listening to me talk about my residency interviews. And then it came, right as he reached for the salt. "A soldier or a surgeon," he said, not looking at me. "Seems like neither worked out." The words landed with a soft, poisonous thud. I set down my fork. Slowly, carefully, like it might explode. Mom stirred her peas around and said nothing. Just like always, and me, I said nothing too, not because I didn't have words, but because I did and they would have burned the place down. Instead, I smiled. Not because I meant it, because it was safer. Because I had learned that silence was armor. And sometimes, armor was all you had. Later that night, I sat on my childhood bed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars I'd put on the ceiling when I was 10. They were still there. Dim now, peeling at the edges, just like me. I pulled out my journal and wrote one sentence: "This isn't failure. This is fuel." I repeated it 10 times. This wasn't the end of my story. It couldn't be, but God, it was hard not to feel like it. Every time he mocked me, my education, my choices, my dreams, I felt 12 again. Powerless. Unseen. And yet the ache was different this time, because now I knew who I was, even if no one in that house saw it. I had fought for every inch of ground I stood on. I had bled for it in study rooms, in labs, in late-night walks through cold city streets with nothing but caffeine and ambition to keep me warm. I wasn't some girl with delusions of grandeur anymore. I was a woman with a degree, a plan, and a fire that hadn't gone out, no matter how many times he tried to snuff it. I didn't say anything that night, or the next, but I kept applying, and I kept training. Because someday, somewhere, someone would see me. And when they did, I would be ready. I didn't know the ad would change everything. It was one of those nights where sleep refused to come, when the silence in my tiny rental room felt too loud, and the future too far away to touch. I'd spent the day rewriting my resume for the 5th time, applying for jobs I wasn't excited about just to keep the lights on. And then, in the quiet scroll between despair and distraction, there it was. Dayton Fire Department recruitment, now accepting new applicants. No experience required, just courage. I sat up straighter, reread the words, just courage, that I had. A flicker of something stirred in me, a memory sharp and physical. Jogging the campus track at dawn, pulling an all-nighter before finals, hauling textbooks in the rain because I refused to skip class. The bruises, the blisters, the silent discipline I'd built while no one was watching. And suddenly I remembered, I had trained for more than medicine. I had trained for resilience. It didn't matter that firefighting had never crossed my mind before. What mattered was how it felt, like heat, like motion, like purpose, like everything I had been missing. The next morning, I printed out the application, hand trembling and breath quickened. There was a physical exam, a written test, an interview panel, requirements stacked like hurdles, but I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. Over the next few weeks, my world shifted. I began running again early before the city woke up. I hit the local gym, using the cheap membership I'd been too scared to afford. I watched videos on search and rescue techniques, firefighting procedures, strength drills. And quietly I began to remember who I was before the world taught me to shrink. Every push-up, every stair climbed with a weight vest was a whisper to myself, "You are not done." The day of the exam arrived in a burst of wind and nerves. I stood among a sea of applicants, mostly men, broad-shouldered and loud, but I kept my chin high. I didn't speak much. I didn't need to. I let my body do the talking. And it did. I passed the physical with seconds to spare, dripping sweat, lungs burning, but smiling. I passed the written too, acing the sections on fire dynamics and medical response. And the interview, I told them the truth, that I'd been knocked down, that I knew how to get back up, that I was used to being underestimated and had learned to let that fuel me instead of defeat me. 3 weeks later, I got the call. "Jenna Walker, welcome to the Dayton Fire Department. Orientation starts Monday." I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, phone still to my ear. Welcome. That word felt like water in a desert. The firehouse smelled like coffee, sweat, and steel the day I first walked in. Boots clunked on the concrete floor, radios chirped in the distance, and somewhere someone was laughing. I didn't know a soul, but I felt something I hadn't felt in years, belonging. They handed me gear too big but mine, a locker with my name in permanent marker, a schedule, a purpose. During break, a guy with kind eyes and a buzzed head came over, balancing a Gatorade on each palm. "Marcus," he said, grinning. "You passed that CPAT like it owed you money." I laughed, surprised by the warmth in his voice. "Jenna." With form like that, I'd bet you were born for this. My throat tightened unexpectedly, because for once it didn't feel like a joke. It felt like truth. I looked around at the others, men and women stretching, suiting up, reviewing drills. No one here cared that I was a girl. No one rolled their eyes when I spoke. No one told me I didn't belong. That was new. That was everything. I stood a little taller. And for the first time in a long time, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, this was the life I was meant to live. There's something sacred about the firehouse kitchen. It's not fancy, just a long table with mismatched chairs, a whiteboard of shift notes, and a crock-pot that never stops working. But the air inside, it hums with stories. That night we were eating chili and cornbread. Simple, hot, perfect. The kind of meal that fills more than your stomach. Marcus sat across from me, retelling the time he got stuck halfway through a doggy door trying to rescue a terrier during a basement fire. The whole room cracked up as he mimed the wriggling, his arms waving dramatically. Thing weighed 5 pounds soaking wet, and I still needed a crowbar to get out of that wall. He groaned between bites. Next to him, Roy, the grizzled 40-something who could patch a leak blindfolded, added, and he came out without the dog. The thing ran past him and peed on the captain's boot. Everyone burst out laughing again, even me. Not a polite chuckle, not a quiet smile. A real laugh, loud and full. It caught me by surprise. Claire, our captain, glanced up from her bowl, eyes thoughtful. She wasn't much of a talker, never had to be. Her presence alone settled the room. Calm, sure, grounded. "You've got the makings of a leader, Jenna," she said, just loud enough to carry across the table. The words landed so gently I almost didn't feel them, until I did. I looked at her, startled. "Me," she nodded once. "You observe before you speak, you push through without complaining, and you've already earned the crew's respect. That's leadership." I didn't know what to say. It wasn't just that I appreciated the compliment. It was that I couldn't remember the last time anyone had spoken to me like that, with conviction, with belief, without a single trace of condescension. Claire didn't say it to flatter me. She said it like it was fact. And somehow I knew she meant it. The table grew quieter as the bowls emptied and the cornbread disappeared. Someone turned on the radio, an old country song humming low in the background. Roy leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head. "We're due for a slow week. You'll see, every time we get a new recruit, we get 2 weeks of peace and nothing but cat calls." "Cat calls?" I blinked. "Literally," Marcus said with a groan. "You'd be surprised how many cats get themselves into some kind of rooftop drama." "Don't jinx it," Claire warned without looking up. "Quiet's a gift, not a guarantee." And just like that, the mood shifted, easygoing but alert. That was something I'd come to admire here, how quickly they could go from laughter to readiness, like flipping a switch. It made me feel safe. Like if something ever happened, really happened, I'd be standing beside people who wouldn't run. That night, as I pulled off my boots and changed into sweats in the locker room, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. Sweaty, hair tucked under a cap, face a little sunburned from that afternoon's drill. But something in my eyes looked different, still sharp, but softer around the edges. I was steady, settled, like I was no longer waiting for someone to let me belong, because I already did. For the first time, the voice in my head wasn't my father's. It was Claire's. "You've got the makings of a leader." I didn't write in my journal that night. I didn't need to. The page had already been written in every laugh, every story, every glance around that kitchen table. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't holding my breath, waiting to be noticed. I was simply there. And that was enough. You never forget the sound of fire, not the crackling you hear in movies. The real thing is deeper, hungrier. Like the world is breathing flames and you're just an afterthought. The call came in just before sunset. Apartment fire. Mid-rise. Smoke visible from 3 blocks out. We moved fast, pulling on gear with the muscle memory we'd trained into our bones. No hesitation, no questions, just movement. By the time we arrived, smoke was already pouring from the 3rd floor. Neighbors stood on the sidewalk in clumps, some crying, some filming. The building manager waved frantically. "Everyone's out, except we're missing someone from 3B. That's all I needed to hear. Claire pointed, her voice sharp and calm. "Jenna, you're with me. Marcus, clear the 2nd floor." We pushed into the building, visibility dropping with every step. The heat hit me in waves. The hallway to 3B was a tunnel of smoke and chaos. Claire's radio crackled. Conditions deteriorating fast. We reached the door. I kicked it open, dropping low. Inside was a wall of gray, smoke thick enough to choke the sun. The alarm was still blaring, a shrill reminder that time was running out. That's when I saw her. A shape in the far corner slumped against the wall, one arm shielding her face. She looked barely conscious, swaying like a broken reed. Without thinking, I went for her. "Ma'am, can you hear me?" She didn't respond. I dropped my weight, hauling her up with one arm while my lungs screamed. Every instinct said get out. The air was growing hotter, the floor beneath us groaning with tension. "Jenna, move!" Claire's voice shouted from the hallway. I pulled the woman over my shoulder. Every step back felt like climbing a mountain through molasses. My legs shook, my eyes stung, but I didn't stop. We were 2 feet from the door when the ceiling groaned, louder this time. Claire reached in, grabbed my jacket collar, and yanked us both into the hallway just as the apartment behind us collapsed in a roar of flames. The heat knocked us to the ground. But we were out. We were alive. The medics rushed in, pulling the woman onto a stretcher. I dropped to my knees, coughing so hard I thought my ribs might crack. My face burned. My hands felt raw inside my gloves. Then I saw Claire kneeling beside me, eyes wide but steady. "You okay?" I nodded, unable to speak. She placed a hand on my shoulder. "That was reckless." I nodded again. She tightened her grip. "And brave." That was when I realized my gear had melted in places, my sleeve scorched, my neck blistered beneath the collar. The pain was only now beginning to bloom. The paramedics insisted I go with them. I wanted to argue. I wanted to walk out on my own 2 feet, prove I was fine, but I wasn't. And deep down, I knew it. I let them load me onto the stretcher. The sky above was a blur, pink and gold fading into smoke. The crowd had gathered again, whispering, pointing. Someone said, "She carried that girl out." Another voice, "She saved her." The words floated around me like ash. And then everything went black. I woke up in the hospital 2 days later. Claire was sitting by the window, arms crossed, her eyes puffy but dry. "They said you'll recover," she said without turning. "Burns on your arm, some smoke inhalation, nothing that won't heal." I blinked. My throat was too dry to speak. She finally looked at me. "Jenna, you didn't just save her, you risked everything. That building collapsed 10 seconds after you cleared it." I tried to nod, but even that felt heavy. "I've seen a lot of rookies," she added. You're not one." Her voice broke just slightly. "You're one of us." That's when I cried, not because I was hurt, but because for the first time in my life, someone saw what I was willing to give and didn't flinch. I wasn't Rick Walker's daughter in that moment. I was Jenna, firefighter, survivor, leader. The envelope sat untouched on my kitchen table for 2 days. White cardstock, gold lettering, a wax seal with a delicate C pressed into the flap. Caleb's wedding. The brother who used to steal my fries, defend me on the school bus, and silently hand me his coat when I cried behind the barn after one of Dad's rants. We hadn't talked much since I moved away. Not because we didn't care, but because he stayed close to the family and I didn't. I opened it slowly. The invitation was elegant, understated. Ave Marie Lewis, garden ceremony, reception to follow. There was no note inside, no personal message, just the formal invitation. Still, it was enough to make my chest ache. I stared at it for a long time. Then I folded it back into the envelope and slid it into my drawer. I didn't say yes right away, but I didn't say no either. 3 weeks later, I stood in front of my closet, slipping a navy blue dress over my bandaged arms. The fabric was soft and long-sleeved, chosen carefully, not because I was ashamed, but because I didn't want to explain. The burns were still healing. Pink, shiny, angry. They didn't match the delicate embroidery of my dress or the calm smile I practiced in the mirror. I ran a hand through my hair. Shorter now, since the hospital shaved parts away to treat the wounds. It suited me, rough around the edges, a little less worried about looking soft. The reception was held at a garden hall in Cincinnati, the kind with white chairs and twinkle lights strung from the rafters, where everything smelled like flowers and champagne, and people laughed too loud at nothing. I arrived quietly. No grand entrance, no demands for attention, just a breath and a step forward. Caleb found me first. "Jenna!" His voice broke just a little. I turned, and there he was, tucks too tight, eyes a little wet, smile as wide as ever. We hugged. Long, tight, wordless. Then I reached into my purse and handed him a small box. Inside was a silver pocket watch. Engraved on the back, time reminds us who we are. He stared at it for a moment, then swallowed hard. You remembered. Of course I did, I whispered. You used to sneak Dad's watch and pretend you were a time traveler. He laughed, eyes shining. I thought I'd go back in time and stop him from yelling so much. I used to pretend I'd fast forward, I said softly, to a day when he didn't matter so much. We stood there a moment, suspended in our shared childhood. Then someone called his name, and he was swept away in the tide of guests and music and sparkling wine. I wandered to the edge of the party, sipping ginger ale and listening to the clinking of glasses and the hum of conversations. My sleeves itched. My scars throbbed under the fabric, but I held my head high. No one knew what I had done, what I had survived, and that was okay. This night wasn't about me. It was about showing up anyway, being present even when the past threatened to pull me under. For now, I was content to stand in the shadows, to watch, to breathe, to wait. Because something told me the quiet part of the night wasn't going to last long. The glass tapped once, then again. That familiar sound, the signal for a toast, rippled through the garden hall, silencing clinking forks and murmured conversation. I felt my breath catch. It was my father. Rick Walker stood at the front of the room, champagne flute in hand, shoulders square under a tailored navy suit. He looked exactly the same. Graying hair, clean shave, the hint of impatience always curling around his mouth like a sneer half swallowed. I hadn't spoken to him since I walked through the doors. And now here he was, centered, composed, performing. Evening, everyone, he began, raising his glass. For those who don't know me, I'm Rick, Caleb's father. And if you do know me... He chuckled to himself, and a few polite laughs followed. Well, then I'm sure you've already heard my thoughts on weddings. I glanced toward the buffet table, willing the moment to pass. I've always said, Rick continued, that a wedding is when a man truly steps into his purpose, when he becomes something more than himself, a provider, a protector, a man. He looked toward Caleb, pride beaming. My boy has grown into that. He's taken the straight path. College, career, marriage, all in order, all with honor. Caleb looked mildly uncomfortable, but he smiled anyway. Rick paused, tilted his glass. And then there's our Jenna. My stomach dropped. It was subtle. So casual that anyone outside the family might have missed the shift in his tone, but I knew that rhythm, that edge. She's still figuring it out, I suppose. A beat, nervous laughter, the kind that grows when people aren't sure if something was meant as a joke. She's had quite the journey, Rick went on, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Tried school, tried something with fire trucks, I think. I couldn't breathe. My fingers curled tightly around the stem of my glass. Every muscle in my body screamed, don't react. Don't give him the satisfaction. Rick looked around the room, eyebrows raised like he was sharing a fun little anecdote. We're still not entirely sure what it is she does, but she's passionate about it. A chuckle, more laughter, this time louder, like it was finally okay to laugh now that Dad had started it. I looked to Mom. She was giggling, not loudly, but enough. Like this was normal, like it was fine. I felt heat rush up my neck, not from shame, from rage, from betrayal. This was supposed to be Caleb's night. And yet somehow Rick had found a way to turn it into a stage for his oldest hit, humiliate Jenna Walker. I stood there frozen, glass still in hand, face burning. They didn't know. They didn't know about the fire, the rescue, the pain, the scars. To them, I was still the girl who left home with big ideas and came back with nothing. Still just the one who never figured it out. The laughter faded, the toast ended, and people returned to their conversations. But something in me had shifted. Not broken. No, something had hardened. I set my untouched drink on a nearby tray and walked outside, out past the string lights and manicured hedges. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stood there. Still, straight, unshaken. Because the old me might have run from that room, hiding her face, hiding her hurt. But I wasn't her anymore. And if Rick Walker wanted to humiliate me in front of 100 guests, let him. Because the night wasn't over yet. The garden smelled like roses and spilled champagne. I stood alone under a string of fairy lights, hands gripping the railing, the laughter from inside now just a muffled echo. My chest still buzzed with that awful mixture of adrenaline and shame, the kind that feels like you're falling even though your feet are firmly planted. I stared at the gravel below, willing myself to breathe, to let it go. Then I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate. "Jenna!" I turned slowly. Ava the bride stood a few feet away, her satin heels glinting under the lights, her gown flowing like river water around her ankles. Her veil was pinned back and her makeup had smudged slightly beneath her eyes. She'd been crying. I straightened instinctively, expecting small talk or another awkward apology for Dad's words. Instead, she walked right up to me and without hesitation wrapped her arms around me. Tight, grateful, fierce. "You saved her," she whispered into my shoulder. I froze. "What?" She pulled back, blinking fast, tears spilling over now. "My sister. You saved my sister from that apartment fire 2 months ago." I stared at her. "You were the one," she told me. "She couldn't remember your name, just that you were strong, that you carried her through smoke like an angel, that she thought she'd imagined you." My hands trembled. "I didn't even know who she was," I said softly. "I just couldn't leave her." Ava nodded. Her lip quivered, but her smile broke through. "You didn't. You saved her. You saved Emily." That name hit me like a wave. I remembered the girl, the weight of her, the way her breath had rattled as I carried her down the hallway, the split second before the ceiling gave way. I remembered the pain, the burns, the blinding smoke. And now a face, a connection. "My sister's alive because of you," Ava whispered, wiping her cheeks. "And we had no idea until she saw your picture this week. Caleb posted something about you coming. She couldn't believe it." I didn't know what to say. For once, the words didn't come. Ava reached into her clutch and pulled out her phone, scrolling quickly. Then she held it up. On the screen was a photo, me in my fire gear, face soot-streaked, arms wrapped around a woman half-conscious as we emerged from a burning doorway. It wasn't taken by a crew member. It wasn't posed. It was real. Raw. A moment of truth frozen in time. "She found this on a local news site," Ava said quietly. "I guess someone captured it. The article didn't name you, but it was you." My breath hitched. The photo was blurry, but unmistakable. And for the first time since stepping foot in that reception hall, I felt seen. Ava looked me in the eyes. "You're not some lost girl, Jenna. You're a hero. And it's time they knew." When we walked back into the reception hall, Ava was holding my hand. She didn't let go. Inside, the music had returned, soft and slow, couples twirling beneath the garden lights. Conversations buzzed. No one noticed us at first, until Ava let go of my hand and stepped toward the mic. I froze. "Ava," I whispered, my voice low. She looked back over her shoulder, eyes shining. "Before we go further, there's something you all need to see." The DJ, clearly caught off guard, turned the volume down. Caleb stepped forward from the dance floor, eyebrows raised in confusion. The room quieted. Glasses stopped clinking. A stillness fell across the guests, like everyone could sense something important was about to unfold. Ava cleared her throat, nerves flickering in her voice, but only briefly. "This morning, I wasn't planning on giving a speech," she began, "but something happened tonight that I can't ignore." A hush settled. She continued, gaze steady. "Some of you may know that my younger sister, Emily, nearly lost her life in an apartment fire 2 months ago. Most of you didn't know that. It's not something we talk about much. It was traumatic, scary, but also life-changing." Murmurs drifted across the tables. Ava lifted a small remote in her hand. The projector screen at the front of the room flickered to life. What appeared wasn't a slideshow of wedding photos or childhood memories. It was grainy video footage, time-stamped and raw. A local news report. A fire blazing out of a 3-story building. Sirens screaming. Neighbors screaming. Then the image shifted. And there I was, carrying a limp body through a wall of smoke, my uniform scorched, my arms exposed, raw and burned, my face twisted in pain and grit as I staggered toward the medics, refusing to fall until she was safe. The room gasped. The footage was shaky, shot from a distance, but no one could deny what they were seeing. I could hear a fork hit the floor, then a whisper. "Is that Jenna?" Caleb stared, mouth slightly open. And then a sharp crack. Rick's champagne flute slipped from his hand and shattered against the tile. All eyes turned to him. He didn't move, didn't breathe, just stared at the screen as if trying to rewrite what he was seeing. Ava's voice rang out again, stronger now. "That woman in the video is Jenna Walker, my husband's sister, the same woman who stood here earlier and was made the butt of a cruel, careless joke." Silence. No one laughed this time. Ava turned toward me. She didn't tell anyone what she did. She never took credit. She didn't need to. That's what makes her brave. That's what makes her extraordinary. I stood frozen near the back of the hall, unable to move, my heart hammering against my ribs, not in fear, but in release. For once, someone had lit a fire on my behalf and let it burn through the lies. Rick still hadn't spoken. His hands trembled. His jaw worked like he was trying to summon words that had never lived in his vocabulary. The screen faded to black. No one moved. Then Ava set the mic down gently and walked toward me. And just like that, the room began to shift. Eyes turned from him to me. And for the first time in my life, they saw me. Not the disappointment, not the dropout, not the embarrassment. They saw the woman who ran into fire when others ran out. And somewhere in that room, something cracked open. Not just in them, in me. The silence in the room was thick. People didn't quite know whether to clap, cry, or leave. I didn't move. I was still standing at the edge of the reception hall, heart pounding in my ears. The screen behind Ava had gone dark. The last frame of me, kneeling next to the girl I'd carried out of the fire, flickered in my mind like an echo. Then Rick stood. He didn't look at anyone, just me. The man who had once mocked my dreams with a smirk was now pale, his fingers gripping the back of his chair like it was the only thing keeping him upright. He started, voice barely audible. I had no idea. The room held its breath. He took a slow step toward me, one, then another. Each one seemed to cost him. That was you, he asked, like he needed confirmation, like even after seeing it, he still couldn't reconcile the woman on that screen with the daughter he'd spent years diminishing. I didn't move. I didn't nod. I just looked at him, really looked at him. The man who'd once stood in our kitchen, arms crossed, laughing as he told me military school would break me. The man who, hours ago, turned a toast into a wound. And now he looked small. I had no idea, he repeated, as if the words could undo what he'd done. This time I spoke. It always was me, I said quietly. I just stopped waiting for you to notice. He flinched like I'd struck him. The room remained frozen, tables full of guests caught in the strange stillness between revelation and reckoning. He stepped closer, slowly, until he was only a foot away. And then, for the first time in my life, Rick Walker reached out with a hand that trembled and placed it gently on my shoulder. His voice dropped to a whisper. I'm proud of you, Jenna. I'm sorry I wasn't before. A lifetime of words I thought I'd never hear. And somehow, hearing them didn't break me. They didn't even move me to tears, because I'd already survived the fire he set long ago and come out stronger. Still, I let them land. Not because I needed them, but because I had earned them. I gave him the smallest nod. Thank you. That was all. No dramatic embrace, no swelling music, just a long, overdue truce in the soft pause between songs. Behind us, the music resumed, gently now, like the night itself had exhaled. I turned toward the garden doors and walked outside, the night air cool against my cheeks. I didn't cry, not out of pride, but because I didn't need to. That moment wasn't about pain anymore. It was about peace. The garden lights had dimmed. Only a few guests remained now, scattered across the lawn, laughter softened by distance and wine. Caleb and Ava were dancing slowly under the archway, lost in their own world. I sat on a wooden bench near the edge of the garden where the grass gave way to a gravel path and the sky opened wide above us. The night was cool, crisp, and quiet. And then footsteps, heavy, hesitant. I didn't have to turn to know it was him. Rick sat down beside me without a word. Not too close, just enough. For a few long minutes, we said nothing. The silence was a language we both finally understood, one that didn't need to be filled. He cleared his throat. Your brother looked good tonight. I nodded. He did. Another beat of quiet, then more softly, so did you. I turned to look at him. His eyes weren't glassy with drink. They weren't steeled with judgment. They were just tired, and maybe, for once, honest. I watched that video 3 times, he said, trying to figure out how I missed it. How I missed you. I didn't answer, not yet. He ran a hand through his hair. I thought I was doing you a favor, being hard on you, trying to toughen you up. I didn't realize I was just shutting you down. A pause. You never needed toughening, he added quietly. You were already stronger than me. That hit, not like a blow, like a truth I'd been waiting to hear my entire life but never expected to. I didn't do it to prove anything to you, I finally said. I did it because I couldn't live with myself if I didn't. He nodded. I believe that. The cicadas hummed in the distance. A soft breeze rustled the hedges. I'm not going to pretend I deserve forgiveness, he said, but I want to do better. I want to be present, supportive, maybe even proud out loud. I raised an eyebrow. Proud out loud, huh? He gave a small smile. That was your mom's phrase. She used to say I loved you kids silently, like I was afraid of saying it wrong. I stared at the gravel path in front of us. Saying nothing was saying it wrong. I know, he said, and for once he didn't argue. We sat there for a while, letting that honesty breathe between us. Then he asked something I didn't expect. Does it hurt, the burns? Some days, I said, but it's manageable. He looked down. I didn't know it was that bad. I didn't tell anyone, I said. It wasn't about the pain. He glanced at me, brow furrowed. It was about the fact that I chose it, I said. That no one forced me into the fire. I walked in, I made that decision, and I needed to sit with that for myself, not for applause. He nodded, swallowing hard. I saw him differently now, not smaller exactly, but human, flawed, uncertain. And maybe that was all I ever wanted from him, to be real, to admit he didn't have all the answers, to look at me not as a challenge to correct, but as a daughter to understand. We watched the stars for a while. I wondered if he was trying to count them like he used to when I was little. Back then, he'd point and say, "Pick one, that'll be yours, that's your light." I had picked one, I'd just gone after it alone. "I'm going to visit more," he said suddenly. "Come by the station, meet your crew, learn who you are now." That surprised me. "You want to meet my captain?" I asked, half amused. He grinned. "Well, if she'll have me." I shook my head, chuckling softly. "You're going to embarrass me, aren't you?" He leaned back on the bench. "Probably." I looked over at him, this man who had hurt me, ignored me, humiliated me, and now sat beside me, humbled. "Okay," I said. "Then we'll start with coffee, in public, where you can't misbehave." He laughed, and it was the first time in years I heard it without flinching. The wedding music drifted faintly behind us. Someone clinked a glass. Caleb and Ava kissed beneath a canopy of lights. And next to me, my father, this time not as a judge or critic, but as a man trying to earn his way back, sat quietly watching the stars. No big speeches, no undoing the past, just a start. And sometimes that's enough. 1 year later, the firehouse smells the same. Coffee, sweat, burnt toast from someone forgetting the timer again, the familiar buzz of morning chatter and boots clunking across the concrete floor. But everything feels different, because now I'm the one wearing the red helmet. Captain in training, Claire calls it. But let's be honest, she's already stepped back enough to let me lead. There's a new batch of recruits today, fresh-faced, slightly terrified, brimming with that unspoken hope that they'll prove themselves worthy. I watch them during drills. Not just their form, but their fear. The way they hesitate before opening a door or how their eyes flick to mine, seeking silent reassurance. I know that feeling too well. One of them, a girl named Ruby with arms like steel cables and nerves like glass, pulls me aside after hose drills. "Ma'am, do the scars ever stop feeling like something people stare at?" I smiled gently, roll up the sleeves of my station tee and let the sunlight hit the long stretch of pink, uneven skin down my left arm. "Nope," I say. She blinks. "But one day you'll realize they're not looking at what you lost. They're looking at what you lived." Her shoulders drop. She breathes out like she's been holding it for weeks. I pat her shoulder. "Now go grab water. You've got round 2 in 15. She jogs off, and I turn back toward the rig. Funny how things come full circle. I used to carry shame under long sleeves and silence. Now I wear my story like a badge. My arms are still scarred. My strength still surprises people. But the difference, now I let it. I visit home once a month, not out of obligation, but because it feels different now. Dad waits on the porch with 2 coffees, black for him, cinnamon oat for me, even though he still calls it that fancy stuff. We sit outside, talk about small things. Sometimes he asks about work. Sometimes he just watches me with this quiet pride he never knew how to give before. And every single time when someone passes by, he introduces me the same way. "This is my daughter," he says, eyes steady. "The hero." At first, it embarrassed me. Then it humbled me. Now I nod and smile, not because I need the label, but because I've earned it. Not from him, not from anyone, from me. One evening, I found Mom in the kitchen peeling apples. The same way she did when I was little, knife gliding in one long curl. She looked up. "I saw the news segment again last week." "Oh," I asked, washing my hands at the sink. They're still playing it sometimes. That shot of you carrying that girl out, you didn't flinch. I was terrified, I said honestly. She nodded. You didn't show it. I glanced at her. I should have said something sooner, she added, about how proud I was, how wrong we were to be so quiet when you needed voices. I didn't answer right away. Then I said I needed to be loud enough for myself first. She smiled, soft and sad. And you were. The lesson is simple now. Real worth isn't granted in toasts or titles. It doesn't come from applause or family pride. It doesn't wait for permission. It's forged in the fire of your own choosing. In the moments no one sees. In the nights you keep going, even when it hurts. In the silence you survive. So to anyone watching who's ever been dismissed, doubted, or diminished, let them laugh. Let them look away. Let them underestimate. And then rise anyway. Because your strength doesn't need their permission to exist. You don't need anyone to say, you're enough, before you start believing it. You already are. Now tell me, where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments. I want to know who's out there walking through their own fire. And if this story reminded you of someone who needs to hear it, send it to them. Because sometimes the bravest thing we do is show up anyway. Scars and all.